First of all, I know I almost always do all my political videos inside, but it's the end of March and we actually have a 60-degree day right now, so I figured I'd spend it outside instead. Anyway, we're going to be talking about tipping points for congressional elections. We'll do a little bit of talking about the House of Representatives, but I really want to focus on the Senate because the Senate, I think, is more tangible for a tipping point and also is easier to find in general. But I'll do it for the House for a little bit. Because 2024, even though the margin of the House for the Republican victory is slightly narrower, more of a shift was needed for Democrats to win. It's like when a Democrat gets more electoral college votes, but the election isn't as close because the tipping point was lower. Now, in this case, also for the House, popular vote doesn't matter. Although, unlike the presidency, where every loser who won the popular vote was a Democrat, in the House, both Democrats and Republicans have been affected by this, where they'll, lose the popular vote for the House and still win it. But in this case, obviously, for the Electoral College, whether or not you win with 270 electoral votes or 538 doesn't really make a difference. Either way, you win. And just like a sports game, the whole point of an election is to win. But margins do matter in Congress since they actually correspond to votes. It does matter how many seats you have. Like for example, 222 to 213 it obviously gives you a bit more wiggle room than 220 to 215 for the House of Representatives. Like, obviously, in that case, you need 5 Republicans in effect from the party, not just 3. So, that's my tangent. Anyway, despite Republicans only having a 3-seat majority, the third seat for Republicans is the tipping point seat. But look, Iowa's 1st district was, and Colorado's 8th district were the only 2 districts that were tilt Republican. The tipping point district came out as Pennsylvania's 7th district, which was won by 1% for the Republicans. Thus, a 1% shift, and the Democrats flipped the House. Even though, assuming that this shift occurs an entirely down ballot, it would still lead to a Republican being elected president. The Democrats would flip the House on a 1% shift. 2022, meanwhile, look at the tilt Republican seats. There's 7 of them. Colorado's 3rd was 0.17. California's 13th was 0.42. Michigan's 10th was 0.49. New York's 17th was 0.64. Iowa's 3rd district, the tipping point district, 0.69%. So as you can see, closer despite the larger margin. 2020, the same margin in favor of the Democrats, but notice that there were no tilt Democrat seats, allowed tilt Republican seats, but no tilt Democrat seats. Thus, the tipping point district in this election was Pennsylvania's 17th district at 2.3%, which, look at the 2, it's the same margin, but Democrats were much closer to winning the House in 2022 than Republicans were in 2020 because, again, of where the closest districts wound up lying. 2018, you had the Republicans would need to have 18 seats to flip this. 2 tilt Democrat, 19 lean Democrat, so it is going to be in the lean Democratic column, the second from bottom, so California's 10th in this case, at 4.5% is the tipping point district. Never would you have guessed that between these, the tipping point district only reduces its margin by half, yet that's the reality. And the reason is that if Republicans are winning the battleground, but are still losing the election, then obviously it's going to lead to a further tipping point. 2016 is interesting and also tough for me to calculate because 187 plus 15 gets you to 202, plus 34 gets you to 236. Again, very few swing districts really on either side. And again, a big margin. 2018, Democrats actually flipped 41 seats. We may never see a flip this big again with how polarized politics has become, because I don't know if either party can ever get to this large of a margin ever again. But I digress. It would have to be somewhere in the middle of this, and I have to really count from the top because my webcam is going to block it on the bottom. So you have 240, 241, you have, and really 236, so it would be the 19th. the 19th. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. It's Utah's 4th district at 12.5% that serves as a tipping point, which is obviously really big. It would have taken a huge shift for Democrats to have gotten to the House. 2014, an even bigger shift. Again, add this 16 to this 200, and it's literally the first two that show up here. Of course, the webcam is blocking it, so I'll have to, I don't know if you can temporarily turn it off. I don't know if you can really see it on this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You can only see 18 on this one. It's between 12.5 and 15%, and I'm sorry, but like, I can't even see what the tipping point district would be because the webcam is like literally blocking it. And I don't know. How you turn it off. Okay. Okay, now that should be better. 2012, again, you know, a lot of lean Republican seats. Republicans have a 234 to 2 majority. The tipping point, 12. So it'll be the 5th seat here. It's North Carolina's 9th district at 6.1%. Note that actually Democrats won the popular vote in the 2012 House elections by 1.1%. So this really gave a 7-point bias in favor of Republicans, which I think is insane. 242 to 195 to 2010. So obviously, you have this, and they won a lot of swing districts. But again, it was going to clearly come down to the likely Republican column. Well, is it actually? Because this is 19 seats. 242 minus 19 is... Oh, it's actually only the 6th district in the likely Republican. So it's Ohio's first at 5.5 points. That's actually surprising as that small. Now, again, 2008, a Democratic landslide for the House. And in this election, obviously the tipping point for the presidency, we talked about how it was around 9%, and we always wonder if it's a blue landslide. These alone add to 218, so New Hampshire's 2nd district at 15 percentage points is a tipping point. That is insane. Again, I really wish I could go through every single election for the House, but it just gets really complicated. And I want to put more attention onto the Senate, because the Senate is more tangible. I do want to say this first, though. The Senate relies a lot on maps. The House, it's a nationwide thing. It's pretty reliable. The Senate could very well be one side flips it because of a map. For 2024, in any case, the tipping point, since Trump won the presidency, 4 seats, it's Montana at 7.1 points as a tipping point. And it's even more complicated than that because this win for Nebraska was against an independent that was 6.7 points. So we don't even know if the independent, what they would have caucused with. So it's very possible that it might have come down to Texas at 8.5 points. 2022 for the Democrats, it would have been 2 seats, so it was Georgia at 2.8 points. I do want to look at what the original margin was, but seeing as Walker would have needed 1.5% to outright win a majority, then it would have been that. I just wanted to look at that because you'll see in 2020 why. Obviously, the tipping point district comes down to Georgia's, the regular at 1.2 points is the closest Democrat one, where it's a tie, where Republicans need an outright majority by losing the presidency, which, by the way, the tipping point for the presidency was actually less than this anyway. So if they had the same shift down the ballot, then it would have been a Republican presidency and thus Senate anyway, but I digress. But look at this. 0.27% off from not even needing a runoff. That's why I don't like these margins, is because for the Georgia runoffs, sometimes it really should be like how far were you from avoiding a runoff, because if Purdue avoids a runoff, then this election where Ossoff wins by 1.2% never happens in the first place. There is no runoff. 2018, Republicans, despite, a blue wave actually gained seats, as you can see here. They gain a seat. And when you look at this and you realize that, Indiana at 5.9 points, the map was so hostile for Democrats, it was almost impossible for them to flip the Senate. 2014, the tipping point seat in 2016, the tipping point seat in a 3-seat majority when you realized who the president was, it all came down to Wisconsin at 3.4 points. 2014, in a 4-seat majority when you realized that there was a Democratic president, it all came down to Georgia at 7.7%. 2012, Democrats had a large majority. When you factor in Obama, it was really 6 seats. So you have to go all the way to Virginia at 5.9 and realize that's where the tipping point was. Granted, 5.4, and it comes down to the presidency anyway, so it'll be Indiana at 5.8. Again, every other Senate election, you can have this weird annoyance of tipping points in relation to what the election actually was. Because in 2016, as an example, it would have been Missouri at 2.8, because if you shift the nation 2.8%, at that point, Clinton is winning the election. 2010, even though Republicans certainly had a wave election, as you saw with the House, look at how bad the map was. They would have needed to get to California at 10% to have won the Senate. It was going to be almost impossible. Because they really shot themselves in the foot in 2008 when a tipping point seat was safe Democrat. The tipping point seat came down to, you have these seats, you have 8 seats, and they would have needed to get to the 9th. Now, 22.7% was New Mexico. At that point, you do realize that at that point, if you flip New Mexico, the whole Senate flips because of the presidency, so you don't actually to get to, South Dakota at 25% for Democrats, which is insane, by the way. But I did just want to bring it up that even still, it was going to be almost impossible. Compared to 2006, where the tipping point seat actually wound up being Virginia at 0.39%. So if Virginia goes red, which is very possible, even though it was still a horrible year for Republicans, they at least keep the Senate. 2004, where it was a tipping point seat, when you realize that Bush won the election, you'll say at first it was South Carolina at 9.6, but it was really North Carolina at 4.6, because if you shift the nation 4.6 points, Kerry is winning the election at that point. 2002, it all came down to Minnesota at 2.2 points. 2000 is interesting because the election came down to Montana at 3.3 points. But at that point, if you shift it even just 0.009%, and I'll show you, if you shifted just that tiny amount, shift Florida to that tiny amount, look, at that point, Bush no longer wins, Al Gore wins the election instead. So all they need to do is that tiny shift in the presidential election, and the Senate flips too. But I get that Montana's 3.3% on that grounds. But then, as we know, Jim Jeffords, who was elected as a Republican by 40 points, wound up defecting and joining the independents, the caucus of the Democrats. I'm not going to get too much in depth with that, but what I will say is that look at Washington. Washington is 0.091%. It's tiny. Republicans would have needed to have won that seat to actually wind up winning the Senate when you realize what Jim Jeffords did to really screw the Republican Party over. 98, Republicans had, a big majority, but Democrats had the presidency, so the tipping point seat was Ohio, 12.9%. 96, again, it came down to Arkansas at 5.4% for Republicans as a tipping point seat. And what I find interesting is that if you shift the nation 5.4% to the right, Clinton still wins the election. It's not like the other ones where a tipping point seat for the Senate is greater than for the presidency. Like 5.4%, Clinton still wins the presidency. 94, the Republican wave, the tipping point seat, came down to Michigan at 9.1. And I'm not really going to go too much in depth. look, tipping points don't just exist in the Senate. I mean, in the presidency. They exist in the Senate. They exist in the House too. They exist, but they're obviously more relevant when you talk about the presidency than the others, because the other ones, margin matters.